And with that, I'd like to welcome Dan Callahan, our guest speaker, guest keynote here from Mozilla. We're really excited to have him here. We're doing something a little different with the keynote. So thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Just real quick, make sure, is the mic level good? Can everyone hear me? For those of you in the back, there are plenty of seats up in the front if you don't want to stand. Without further ado, let's get this thing started. So, as mentioned, my name's Dan. I work for Mozilla. Particularly, I work on the Persona project, which is an effort to establish a new decentralized standard for authentication on the internet. Put another way, my work exists to kill the password. Most people know Mozilla because of our creation and our fostering of the open web through the Firefox web browser. What most people don't know is that Mozilla is a nonprofit that's dedicated to supporting and sustaining a vision of the open web. And the nice thing about Mozilla being a nonprofit is that I'm here not to sell you anything. I'm here to talk to you because of my own personal and deep-held belief in the power of the open web. Firefox is just one way to get there. And by the way, if you haven't used Firefox in a while, give it a shot. The developer tools in particular are just second to none these days. But that's me. What about this keynote? When I was approached by the content committee about giving this talk this morning, we kept coming around to this idea of what should the talk be about? And we kept coming up with this idea of the talk should be about what developers need to know today to be ready for tomorrow. What are the trends that are shaping the internet? What's the strategic outlook? And I accepted the invitation to come here and speak this morning because answering that question is very, very easy. The answer to that question is JavaScript. Everyone in this room, everyone in this industry must learn JavaScript. And so, I was kind of wondering if it'd be applause or kind of discomfort or, there we go. And so what's nice is I can answer that whole fundamental question in about 3 minutes, which leaves me a lot of time to dive into the much more interesting questions of why we have to learn JavaScript, and of what that's going to give us, how that's going to empower us, and how we can use the modern web, modern JavaScript, to improve the sites that we're building and improve the applications that we're building. So let's start with why. When I say we have to learn JavaScript, I mean we have to actually, everyone in this room, everyone in this industry has to sit down and properly learn JavaScript. Because where we're going, a little bit of jQuery ain't gonna cut it. And this is because where we're going is being driven by a cycle that's decades old on the internet. It starts with the web expanding into a new niche, which leads users to expect more and more from the web. And as people expect more from the web, browsers have to improve. They have to become more capable. They have to become faster. They have to go more places to deliver that vision, which lets the web go to more places. And so we've been seeing this for years, ever since the web began, and it's absolutely unstoppable. Everything the web touches, it transforms. We're web developers, we should know that. But if you were to build a mail client today, your client isn't going to be measured against Outlook or Thunderbird. It'll be measured against Gmail. The same thing goes for maps, for Office suites. But the web is disrupting in places that I don't think we've really anticipated, or I didn't anticipate. Home appliances. The Nest Learning thermostat. You can control your thermostat from anywhere you have an internet connection and a browser. Or the Fitbit Aria scale. You step on the scale, and it automatically syncs your weight to an online dashboard, because that's exactly what I want. But at this point, nothing's safe. I'm wearing a pedometer that has no actual display. The only way I can see how many steps I've taken is by going to a web app. And so everything the web touches, it disrupts. Nothing at all is safe. No industry is safe. But what I think is interesting, and what I think is of particular interest to this audience, is what the web is doing and how the web is disrupting the mobile space. And when you think about the mobile space today, our vision and our concept of what that should look like is really shaped by the iPhone, which was introduced back in 2007, 5.5 years ago. And if you look at the original story during the introduction to the iPhone, during Steve Jobs' keynote in 2007 about how third-party developers were going to be able to develop for that platform, he said, quote, "The full Safari engine is inside of iPhone. And so you can write amazing Web 2.0 and Ajax apps that look exactly and behave exactly like apps on the iPhone." And that was the whole story. There was no Objective-C, there was no App Store. The whole story of the web on mobile, as defined by the iPhone 5.5 years ago, was build a web app. If you want an app on the iPhone, build a web app. But the web wasn't ready, and Apple realized in the time it took for the web to be ready that they could in fact cripple the Safari engine, and they could build a walled garden, and they could charge a 30% levy to anything going in and out of their gates. And capitalism worked its magic, and we have a world today where you have this closed ecosystem on iOS, despite starting from this open vision. So the web is disrupting iOS, the web is disrupting mobile, but it's doing it more subtly. An enormous number of applications available on both the Android Play Store, the Google Play Store, and the iOS App Store are nothing more than thin wrappers around UI web views. Not even something using PhoneGap, just a web page that you happen to be able to install through an app store. All three banks that I have accounts with are just web apps. Delta, Southwest Airlines, just web apps. They happen to be wrapped in a native application, but there's nothing very native about them. And so when you look at where this is going, when you look at the market today, Apple was way ahead of the game in saying that the web should be the platform that we're developing for when we're developing for mobile. Microsoft's saying the same thing. HTML5 is a first-class citizen on Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8. See the same thing with Chrome OS, BlackBerry OS 10. Canonical is building a mobile phone operating system, Ubuntu Touch, that blurs the line between web and native, so it's completely seamless. Mozilla is taking it a step further, and we're actually building our own mobile operating system, Firefox OS. We have real phones, it works today. You can make calls using Firefox OS. Firefox OS has no native applications. Everything you can see and touch, the home screen, the lock screen, the app launcher, the dialer, everything on Firefox OS is a web app built with native web technologies. So that's where the web's going. But if that's where the web's going, why does this mean we have to learn JavaScript? A fundamental truth of the web is that JavaScript is the only option we have for reliably creating rich experiences and rich applications. And this makes me deeply uncomfortable. I don't consider myself a JavaScript developer. I'm used to working in a language where I control the backend, where I control my programming environment, where if I'm a CF developer and I see a new feature in CF10 that I like, I can go buy a license to CF10, I can install it, and now I can use the new feature. But the web isn't like that. When I'm developing for the web, I have to worry about the browser, I have to worry about the runtime environment on every single customer computer, on every single user's computer that hits my site. Which means I have to go to a site like caniuse.com to find out, can I use WebSockets yet? And almost, if I have to support old versions of IE, I can't use WebSockets. WebGL, if I need to support IE at all, I can't use WebGL. And so this is frustrating. This is not what I signed up for when I came to be a developer. I wanted consistent, I wanted designed platforms. I didn't want JavaScript, I didn't want incompatibilities. But that's what we have on the web. We have a platform. We have JavaScript, CSS, and HTML served over HTTP. And then we have backends, and it could be any backend. PHP, Cold Fusion, ASP.NET, Python, Java, Ruby, all feeding through this common interface into a common platform. And in cases like WebGL, where something's missing, where the platform isn't quite capable, the platform isn't quite uniform, it's really tempting to reach for a widely distributed plugin, something to smooth over those layers, to give you that nice unified platform. And this works great for a time. But the problem with plugins, the problem with developing for targets that are not JavaScript, CSS, or HTML, is that those targets are on the web, but they're not part of the web. And so when the web moves somewhere new, when that cycle repeats and the web expands into a new niche, like mobile, you're stuck with a dwindling market share. You're stuck with a dwindling number of people you can reach. But everything that's native to the web, by definition, goes where the web goes. And so that's why we have to develop for the web. And with JavaScript being the only option, that's why we have to learn JavaScript. A concrete example, for those of you that flew in through the Minneapolis airport, I imagine you passed by some of the nearly 3,000 iPads that have been installed throughout the concourses. Think about what you have to do to reach someone sitting down at one of those iPads. They can't install plugins, they can't install apps. They probably wouldn't, even if they could, they wouldn't want to. They want to get access to your information. What those people have is they have a really slick device and they have a modern web browser. And so if you develop for the web, you can reach them. If you're developing outside of the web, if you're taking the easier path, the seductive path, the path that I don't have to worry about video codecs, I don't have to worry about acceleration, you can't reach those people. And as the market moves, you can't go with it. And so developing for the web isn't just about reaching those iPads. Developing for the web is about not having to anticipate that those iPads are going to happen. Because if you develop for the web, you're developing for the whole ecosystem. And you go where the web goes. And the web means JavaScript. So that's why you have to learn JavaScript. This is coming, this is happening, this is inevitable. But what do you get out of it? What's in it for you? What's in it for us as developers? Writing JavaScript gives you unparalleled responsiveness. When you think about what our limitations are as developers, as web developers, we're fundamentally limited in the speed of a TCP round trip, which in turn is limited by the speed of light. And we're not going to get around that. It doesn't matter how fast your backend is. If you have to respond to a user request by sending data back to a server and getting a response back, that's a delay that you will not be able to improve. What developing for JavaScript first, what developing in a JavaScript-centric way gets you is the ability to completely skip those TCP round trips. If you move more and more of the logic into the client side, more and more of the logic up into the browser, you can build applications that are more responsive than anything else on offer on the web. And you don't have to give up capabilities. You don't have to give up facilities. The browsers are getting amazingly capable today. You can use things like the HTML5 storage APIs or indexed DB to have persistent storage that's structured, that's easy to access, easy to work with. You can use web workers, which allow you to use multi-threaded JavaScript, so you don't have to worry about that unresponsive script warning. You can go and run some computation off the main thread and use post message to communicate back and forth and update the UI when you need to. If you wrap that up with HTML5 app cache, you can have your users hit your site once, download everything they need automatically, and the next time the user wants to use your application, they don't need an internet connection at all. That's a big part of how we're able to make Firefox OS work. Your dialer is a web app, but you don't need an internet connection to use it. You also have amazing capabilities on the modern web. Browsers, again, are becoming better and better, and they're extending into more and more areas and gaining more and more capabilities. Video and audio tags are natively built in. When plugins didn't make the leap to mobile, we kind of found out that we didn't need them. Because in the time that mobile happened, the web had improved so that I can watch a video on YouTube without Flash. I can listen to music online without Flash. Because the web can do this natively now. You have Canvas for 2D drawing. So here's my copy of Firefox. No meaningful plugins installed. And here's the gallery for D3.js. D3 is a charting tool that lets you do all sorts of just crazy, crazy charts. You do bullet charts, it updates live. You just throw random data in there. Flowing Data did a chart of life expectancy, which is, of course, interactive. You toggle these things on and off. And this is all done with D3. And so if you have this is drawing on canvas, why would you ever ship a static JPEG to a user again? Why would you ever need to embed a Flash applet? But it's more than that. You also have WebGL, which allows you to do pretty legitimate 3D stuff in the browser. Here's a floating shiny knot is apparently the title of this demo. And it's shiny and it floats and it reflects the environment. I can make it glass instead. Ooh. I can use my location and share my location, again, using geolocation APIs, and it found that I'm at the Mall of America. And if the demo works, you should soon see the background change, but maybe not. No. There we go. And so it's real 3D. It's in my browser, no plugins, completely native web technology. You can also get into things like desktop notifications. You can make a mobile phone vibrate through JavaScript now. which is all part of this effort to figure out where the boundary is. What are the things that the web can't do, but native apps can? Mozilla, along with more or less every company in the industry, are trying to figure out where that boundary is and push it so that the web can do everything that native can do. One of the things I'm most excited about, WebRTC allows you to do peer-to-peer video conferencing. It's a little harder to demo live, but we've successfully done calls between Firefox and Chrome, again, using webcams, using your mic on your laptop, no third-party software. And the only way you can access these APIs, the only way you can initiate these sorts of things is over JavaScript. You also don't have to sacrifice performance. JavaScript in the past has been really slow. JavaScript today is very, very fast. Some of the best engineers in our industry are working on building JavaScript VMs and making them faster and faster and faster, and they all work for competing companies. So there's an enormous amount of innovation, an enormous amount of feedback. And there's still a ton of headroom. We can still get faster and faster and faster. One great example of this is ASM.js. Has anyone in the room heard of ASM.js or seen the demos? Mozilla kind of, this came out of nowhere. I heard people talking about this back in February as kind of an, oh, I imagine we could probably do something like this and blah, blah, blah. And then in March, we actually did. So what is this? What is ASM.js? Mozilla defined a subset of JavaScript that's very, very easy to optimize. And if you write code that conforms to that subset of JavaScript, you can run, for one, it's JavaScript, you can run anywhere on the web, but in a browser like Firefox that has optimizations for ASM.js, you can run to within about 2x of native C code using completely portable technology. And this is the part that's going to take a second because I'm on a MacBook Air. But one of the things we did is we teamed up with Epic, and we actually cross-compiled the entire Unreal Engine into JavaScript. 1 million lines of C++ into about 50 megabytes of JavaScript. And it'll take a minute to get the live demo going. My laptop's going to beach ball because, again, I'm on a MacBook Air. But when this thing goes, what you'll see is a thoroughly modern AAA game engine running natively on the web, taking about a 2x hit. I was contemplating starting this earlier, because it does take a second to jit. But then my laptop, the fans go, it sounds like it's about to take off. Oh, come on. All right, so while that goes, I have a video of it that I can show you. And then I'll show it to you live afterwards. But so it looks like that. It's the full Unreal Engine, rendering with WebGL using audio over WebAL. You get reflections, you get lighting, everything works. And it's completely pure web technology, no plugins. See, is this thing started? Oh, preparing, please wait. But I already waited JavaScript. Here we go. And so now I have this nice demo, and this is fully interactive. This is completely real-time rendering on a MacBook Air. And so I can go full screen. And I can look around, I can run around. No plugins, no Flash. And so that's what the web can do. You're not sacrificing performance by targeting the web. But more than that, more than the features, more than the performance, the web offers a universal runtime. PDF.js is another ridiculous example. Firefox didn't have a PDF reader, and we needed one because PDFs are the lingua franca for document exchange on the internet. And so what any sane person would do when asked to write a PDF renderer that runs on Mac, Windows and Linux, and Android, and Firefox OS, any sane person would write that in C. Instead, we wrote it in JavaScript. And what we did was we wrote a 36,000-line JavaScript library that will actually parse and cross-compile PDF language into HTML5 canvas. And so if I go to the cf.Objective website, I scroll down to the fancy brochure, it loads, it's fast. Pure web technology. I can zoom out a little bit so you can see the whole thing. I can select text, I can find text. And so if I inspect this, It's just a bunch of divs with canvas being rendered inside. It's pure web. So the nice thing about this, we've now shipped this to hundreds of millions of users of Firefox, enabled by default. They have a fast, they have a very competitive PDF rendering experience, but because it's written for the web, it was portable, and it takes advantage of all the security sandboxing that web browsers can already do. We're not adding a huge chunk of C code that has to interact with untrusted content from the web. We can do it in JavaScript. It just works. I have thumbnails. It's great. And so, of course, we're doing the same thing for Flash on a project called Shumway. And so here's a little Flash racing game, and I can, move my little truck around. And it's not very exciting, but again, realize that this is an SWF file. I don't have Flash installed, remember? It's no Flash. But I can move my truck, and I can race. And it's great. And this is, again, all JavaScript. Parsing the SWF, compiling it, and rendering it onto an HTML5 canvas. So that's where the web can go. But you can go even further down this rabbit hole, and this is something that just blew my mind. There's a company, Otoy, which is trying to do kind of GPU in the cloud, so you can render high-end CAD files or video games and have the rendered output streamed live to your desktop, 1080p, 60 frames a second. And they wanted this to be possible from any computer that had a web browser. Kind of the idea that you sit down and you don't need to have a beefy GPU because there's one in the cloud for you. A fundamental limitation they ran into was bandwidth. The web supports codecs like VP8, WebM, H.264, but they had their own hand-rolled codec that could hit about 25% smaller file sizes than H.264, but how do you make it work on the web? Because think of those iPads. Those iPads don't have the ability to install a plugin. Even if those users were motivated and wanted to install a plugin, they couldn't get access to that codec. And so naturally, these guys wrote their video codec in JavaScript. And what you get there is, I don't have a live demo of this. I don't think this has been released publicly. The video has. I don't think the actual code has. But so you have a MacBook Pro remote desktop into a Windows box, and the remote desktop in this 1080p video, 120 frames a second, decoded live, no plugins, no Flash, nothing. It's all WebGL, fully interactive, responsive. And it's interesting, because there's not even a video tag. This is rendering to an HTML5 canvas. It's using WebGL. And what about browsers that don't have WebGL, like the iPhone? Well, it turns out that they can fall back to 2D canvas, and they still get around 30 frames a second at 720p. They wrote a video codec in JavaScript, and it's really fast. JavaScript's not that bad anymore. It's fast, it's capable, it's performant. They weren't taking advantage of the ASM.js speedups. That was all hand optimized, which means there's still even more room to grow. And the nice thing about this push to JavaScript is that people are treating it like a real language again, which means that the tooling is getting better, the community is getting better, the idioms are getting better, the libraries are getting better. JavaScript's not that bad anymore. So how do you take advantage of it? If I've convinced you that this is where we all have to go, how are you going to get there? And the first step is realizing that JavaScript being the only option is actually awesome, because every community, every backend community, every web development community is feeling the same pressure and is feeling the same need to move more and more of their code client-side, more and more of their code to the web, more and more of their code to JavaScript, which means there are now just a score of mutually compatible, drop-in, well-designed libraries coming from all over the web, regardless of people's backend experience. We don't have to reinvent wheels anymore. That guy looks pretty happy with the wheel he reinvented, but it's not the most practical. But he does look really happy. I would ride in that wheel if I had the opportunity. But the promise of JavaScript and the fact that we're all having to move into JavaScript means that everyone in this room could sit down next to anyone from any other language background and write mutually idiomatic, mutually compatible code. Interop doesn't mean calling into Java classes anymore. Interop means we're all writing for the same platform. So you think about drop-in components, things that are really built for the web. If you need comments on your site, Discuss. If you need authentication, Persona. I'm happy to talk to you more about Persona, by the way, but this is not the time. Find me after the talk. Entire MVC frameworks, things that used to be the domain, solely the domain of the backend, are moving into the browser. You have things like Backbone.js, Angular, Ember. Templating with Mustache or Handlebars or any of a dozen other libraries. You can use CSS libraries like Less CSS and just execute that in the browser, serve this nice minified, fancy CSS, and it just gets cross-compiled because it's all JavaScript. And what's nice about these, and they're completely seamless, the reason they're drop-in is that they're built for the web. So if you look at how you have to integrate Discuss into a site, you do that by copying and pasting the universal Discuss code, which is a div and a script tag. You put that in your site, you have real-time Ajax-y fancy comments. And you don't have to worry about, was this built for CF, was this built for PHP, was this built for what community, because it's built for the web. Persona, for authentication, the entire API is 3 JavaScript functions: request, logout, and watch. And so if you know how those 3 functions work, and you put them on your page, you can get a login experience where user clicks sign in, Persona loads, they can choose their email address, and they can sign into your site with 2 clicks. No passwords. You don't have to store passwords anymore. Switch accounts. So that's what Persona is. That's what we're building. This site runs those 3 little JavaScript callbacks or functions, has an endpoint for the authentication credentials to be posted to you, and it works. And it works, and it's seamless, and it's drop-in. You don't have to care what these things are implemented in. You don't have to care that Discuss is a Django application written in Python, running on PostgreSQL. You don't have to care that Persona is Node.js talking to MySQL, because those libraries target the web as their primary platform. They're first-class citizens of the web, which means they're written in JavaScript, which means they use HTTP as a transport and don't assume things about the back end. And this is possible by taking your own application and looking at the interface between your back end and the browser and starting to try to structure things. You can start to do this by structuring things as data services. Move data, move JSON instead of HTML. And as you do that, you can then consume that data with any number of libraries, any number of tools on the client side. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert at this. Like I said, I don't yet consider myself a JavaScript developer, but that's one of the great things about cf.Objective is that there's an entire track that I'm going to be sitting in to learn JavaScript. Because the march of the web isn't going to change. There's no going back. There's no putting this genie back in the bottle. We all have to learn JavaScript. We have to learn it properly because there's no degree of back-end magic that can write front-end JavaScript for you. But this presents an enormous, thank you. This presents an enormous opportunity and an enormous obligation. It's an opportunity because for once, we're all pulling in the same direction. Everyone from every language community, everyone that's a web developer is writing code in JavaScript. We can collaborate. We can stand on the shoulders of giants in our industry. We're not limited to a single language, to a single framework anymore. But that means that things are going to move faster, and so we have an obligation to keep up. Because the only way that we're going to be able to deliver the speed, the responsiveness, and the portability that the web is going to demand is by writing rich web apps that focus on client-side JavaScript. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming out this morning. I hope I'll see you in the JS Objective talks. Thank you.